I decided I would change my clothes before this session we're about to hold right now, before our unique friend, expert, our very close friend, Andrey Borisovich Zubov. Are you aware of the most recent developments in his life, as you know, because journalists usually know it all. And I decided that I would wear my best clothes that I have, just because Andrey Borisovich yesterday gave me this gift, my friend Galia, who brought it from Rome. It is so beautiful. Lena, well, it looks as if it belongs here. I think it's a pleasure and a privilege for the school that Andrey Zubov our expert, should agree to talk here at the seminar. Before this class, before Andrey, I would like to show you all, to my liking, a most remarkable journal. First of all, where I look nicely in this portrait, that's good. But there are not so nice portraits there. Here we have editor-in-chief of the magazine that will be available, Almanac. It's called Essays on the History of Conscience. I strongly recommend it to you. If you should see him here, you should see it again, make sure you get a copy, because in our view it's one of the best journals, and whose editor-in-chief wrote a remarkable foreword to this. Not only a foreword, he was an author of many texts, and he edited. And it's so nicely presented, and he brought it with him. I strongly urge you to own this journal. This is for you. Almanac. This is indeed a good text. We are opening this session so that you should enjoy it, because this is what our presenter is like. Dear friends, dear Elena Mikhailovna, dear Yuri Petrovich, thank you ever so much for this possibility to talk here before this audience and before this wonderful audience of journalists. Because, you know, there are some times in my life when the press and broader journalism plays the main role, is in the spotlight. This is the time. And depending on what role should be performed by somebody, because nobody would agree to play the same role, this would determine the future of our country. It is well known, a joke about Napoleon, who said, if I had the press like the government have in Russia, nobody would ever know that I lost near Waterloo. So many things depend upon you. And this fact, which next year indeed will be 200 years. Nobody may be recalling about it. They invited me to talk about this abstract notion, but a topic that is very relevant today. It's more philosophical rather than practical or down to earth, and I find it as a pleasure. It's a cultural matrix of the European civilization. Another thought: what are the premises, spiritual premises of democracy? But this will be part and parcel of this topic. When they're now speaking about the European civilization and European values, people begin to just laugh and hint at this homophobia and homophilia and things like this, as if the European civilization was all about deviant relations between the sexes, as if they forgot about Plato, Goethe, Dante, with Aquiline profile, as if they forgot Alexander of Macedonia and Julius Caesar with his notes on the Gallic War, Mark Aurelius. And the only thing that remains is this: are you against or are you all for? In one disgusting caricature that was distributed by the Novosti, map of Europe, where Scotland is separating, Catalonia is in flames, and among France you see half man, half woman. This is what European values are about. As we say, everybody would see what one chooses to. Probably those who do not see any further and know no better, this is what this is. Surely this exists in Europe nowadays. But these things related to sexual deviations, they, in point of fact, are not something accidental. This is one of manifestations as culture, one of epiphenomena of a very profound things. And it's not about hedonism here. Hedonism was prevalent in every culture and exists in every culture in Arabic world, in India, and has always been the case there in China, whatever. Hedonism, enjoyment, this is something typical of everybody. The thing is about, we speak about other things. Yes, a trait of Europe, which, strange as it may seem, and we will see that it is not strange at all, is its manifestation, though a bad manifestation, but it's as typical of Europe as it was the very fact that it is in Europe that gave rise to scientific and technological civilization. Nowhere else in the world, never. I'm speaking about as a culturologist. It is in Europe where political democracy, out of archaic forms of organizing tribal unions, which have been existent everywhere, to where it turned into the center of political life, and remains as it is and seems to be one of its most important elements. It is in Europe where the main, artistic manifestation, both in sculpture and in painting, is portrait. Nowhere elsewhere. In South Asia this is unthinkable. Drawing is something that came very late under the influence of Gondhale art. In China it is mostly landscape. They didn't know how to make portraits. It was Egypt, but I would immediately discover this mystery that Egypt certainly. Egyptian portrait is something unsurpassable, but Egypt is about Europe too. Yes, it is the other side of the Mediterranean, but Egypt is the cradle of the European civilization. One of its most important components that through Judea, Palestine, think about the Exodus, that through Critus, if you don't think of Merezhkovsky, Tutankhamun on the Crete, and through Crete was adopted into the European culture. Egypt is what Europe was like before Europe. Why? Why did this arise in Europe and did not arise anywhere else? Yes, and another point I wish to make that is less known, but maybe most important, and less European. I'm sorry. This is freedom of judgment of the judge that is above the law. Anglo-Saxon system of law. Not only Anglo-Saxon, you would see it present everywhere. This is also something typical of Europe. Napoleon say, whom we recalled because of the Waterloo in this joke, Napoleon gives a civil code, but Europe lived before this code, and Michelangelo created without that code. And the Parisian universities were founded in 2000 without this code. The idea of judgment, of the judge that stands above the written law, this is a great idea which I will be referring to. This is also the European idea. But why does this go? Where does it all come from? Let's begin with simplest things, with aesthetics, with art. What is a portrait about? The portrait is the image of man, adoration of man. Why man? And in man, his face became the supreme artistic category. Why? Why is it that in the mysterious epoch of the turning point between the 4th and 3rd millennia before Christ, we see Egyptian post-mortal portrait? And I hope that you will still 1,000 times attend the Louvre and the British museums and Museum of Berlin. Go to these halls of portraits, of statuary, and you will be amazed and shocked by the artistic expression and internal energy and force that emanate from. If you stand before the scribble in Louvre, I sat for hours there and could not leave. I smiled as a fool. I could not leave that place because he smiled back at me. What is it all about? In ancient Egypt, I'm not saying that it's Christianity, no, although certainly all these ancient things were inherited through us through Christianity, but Christianity did not come first here. In ancient Egypt, it was perfectly known that man is the image of God and in the likeness of God. That's why they used different words. But don't let's go deep into it. Moreover, it was known that in something that causes bewilderment among Christian theologians, but they would agree to it, that man is the flesh of God. He became part, it's in flesh the icon of God. In Egypt they used the pun, remich remet. Remich, it means people, and remet means tears. People are the tears of God. What does it stand for? Tears, it's part of his flesh. Tears are secretions of the tear glands. 1,000 of interesting connotations stand behind it, and I would love to dwell upon it for hours, but I cannot afford to do so right now. And I have lectures on ancient Egypt. If you want to listen to them, they are online. So in the man, they saw in man divine image of God, as the Gospel says, nobody has ever seen. But the Son of God, who exists in the profoundness of his Father, he manifested. And think the categories of man and Father. What is the main prayer in Christianity? It's Dominus. It's the attitudes, relations between something that are alike. The Son is alike his Father, has his free will, yes, for sure, but he is continuation of his Father. He is with the same flesh. He has the same genetic code with his Father. That's why people who lived in ancient times, they did not know about genetics, but about fatherhood and sonhood. They were speaking about the unity of man and God. And the same was perceived in Egypt long before these profound, crazy profound things, when they said that every man, be him this or that, they gave him names, Egyptian names, saying, Neferkara, whatever. He was born before this world was created in God. It means that every man is the son of God. This is what Christ says, I'm going away to meet my Father, go back to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. So it begins with Egypt, through the mysteries of Greece. This is probably something that was asserted in the Eleusinian mystery, in Dionysianism. In Christianity, they proclaim this great thought that man and God are one. That Christian theology came up with it very strictly. That the Maker is God, but people are gods in terms of all the good that is given to them. So, it seems so far away from us. No, it's only half a step away from our topic. That is why the portrait, it is not the image of Masha, Katsu, Neferkara. No, the portrait is the image of God, of the maker of this world, the supreme creature of all, but personally identified in this particular person, in any person. Every man is the image of God, every man. And man in general, and Russian theologists of the 20th century, in the Immigration, the famous author of the Russian, Zinkovsky, who wrote that the category of the image of God has to do not so much to human nature, but to the personality of man. It's not so much just man in general, but every specific person with his name. He is the image of God. And in this is the foundation and the basis of the most fundamental, profound basis of the European civilization. It stands on the assumption that people are not just John's Z's put it. Man is only the end of the hair in the skin of the horse. But every man is priceless. Yes, surely.
Тысячу раз, миллион раз Европа отходила от этого принципа.
For millions of times, Europe has been deviating from this. But this is something that still lies as a part of it, as the foundation of it. And this is the basis of all attitudes, from economic to legal, and all aesthetic and legal peculiarities of the European civilization. If we ignore it, most modern Europeans, in terms of cultural, they continue to this continuity of tradition, continue to treat man as a priceless image of God, although they disregard it, although they decided not to write about it in the European preamble to the European Constitution. But in reality, this is the case. So things that do not abhor Genghis Khan, catacombs of human sacrifices, murder, and Timur-Lenk, this is something that horrifies the Europeans. That is why the Holocaust, that would have been just rubbish for, I don't know, Pol Pot. For Europe, it's a tragedy forever. For Europe, for the European attitude towards man, as all the other things related to it, like our tragedies of the 20th century, our homicide in Russia, things that were perpetrated here. The Europeans are interested in man not as a biological creature. As a biological creature, yes, he remains the same everywhere, and in no way different from animals. In the same way we sleep, we eat, we die and given birth to, and they're interested in just as their free personality. And in man, they're interested things that are not flesh, the same like in beasts, quite the opposite. They're ashamed of this at pinnacle moments of European culture, but something that is the flesh of God. Man is flesh of God. Why is that important? The thing is that in South Asia, that also in India, they keep saying that there is Atman, human Atman goes together with absolute being, but through defleshing. Flesh is something, an illusion. We should not need this samsara as the wheel of retransformation, but for Europeans, flesh is the most important thing, because this is where science is all about. This is the flesh of the world. This is matter, all matter. What follows is mummies in Egypt. Not burning, but keeping it as a great sacrilege. In Egyptian language, this is what they call it. The flesh of the dead says sacred remains. Sacred remains. What follows is admiration of man. And in some centuries, when this, strange as it may seem, where spiritual beginnings began to dominate over it, and men even tended to forget that they are beyond spiritual, they still are a divine image. They tried to underline especially this image of the divine in the things that exist in this world. You remember the frescoes of Ravenna, this emperors and courtiers and ladies. You see this eternal gold of the next world. And you perfectly remember this famous bust of Emperor Constantine, where the sculptor just bored the eye sockets to show the inner sight of the Principe. Not so much his portrait matters, it's his inner essence that matters. So when in Europe they renounce this, then try to move away from divine in man, this immediately goes into portrait. Think about Modigliani's, there are no eyes.
Пространство, да? Или там нацистская скульптура. Кстати, очень хорошая.
Think of Nazi sculpture, which was actually very good. Third Reich sculpture, that's all perfectly done, made. There's something you cannot lose. But instead of eyes, they have just vacuous spaces. This is also very interesting. This is where the mystery of the portrait lies. But through this, we come to the mystery of democracy. It was not in Egypt. In point of fact, modern European civilization is the merge of several principles. This is Indo-European, Aryan, and this Semitic that went through Egypt and through Israel. Again, this is a very vast subject. But in ancient Indo-Aryans had the category of the so-called primitive democracy, well, where Samhita, the gathering, or Sabha, two words were used there in Sanskrit, where it was controlling the activity of the Raj and even elected him. For that matter, it's interesting that unlike in Egypt, where the only priest was the pharaoh, and all other priests were nominated by him, where he is who tried to do what he wanted to do, and in the name of God they did. But in Indo-Aryans it was the other way round. It is the priest who governed the Tsar. Every Tsar had what we call purahita, someone that goes beyond. This was the Brahman who governed the will of the Tsar. But trust in democracy never went away in Indo-Aryan, but it was in Athens or in Rome where it turned into institutional basis of organization of government. And it continued like this in the Middle Ages, in the Republic, including Russian, Veche. Let's forget the word Veche, but certainly arises from the Sanskrit noun vach, a sacred word. And in general, they are present right now. What's the essence, what's the gist of democracy? Not about people who jointly elect their government or control the government or adopt the laws. The essence of democracy is about trust and confidence to man. Man is worthy of trust. Man knows the truth. If man was born first before in the image of God, if man is image of God and God is the founder and the maker of God and is the maker of all laws that govern the world, then man as image of God knows this knowledge, has this knowledge of truth and can make a distinction from the non-truth, and therefore he can govern oneself. This is the great principle of democracy that is based upon the principle of understanding of humans as a divine supreme entity. And
if we look at the main trends, religious trends, and then we can conclude that the Western Christians, Asia. So we can see three different areas. For South Asia, so the person does not need this world. He gets separated from this world. He is after the mind, not the body. He is after the spiritual component of a human being. So he is devoid of this desire, and he separates himself from all that is earthly, and strives for the heaven. And then the earthly life is not a goal in itself. For China, for Southeast Asia, this is the return to space, dissolving in space, when man can be derived from the earthly law, because it's part of the heavenly rhythm, natural rhythm, and so hence this desire for natural, and natural is the way it is, and so natural is normal. Natural is the way we have been created. So this is a divine imprint on our lives, because the Creator is of no interest. The Creator is irrelevant. So we need to go back to the naturedness of events. And so this Southeast, Far Eastern civilization, the salient features, especially the Japanese culture, Japanese religion. So that's very difficult for them to create new technological forms, because they borrow from Europe, but they bring them to perfection. Because their mentality is designed differently, and in Europe it's not dissolvable, and it's the transfiguration of a world, changing the world, changing yourself through changing the world, and making the world different, transforming the world. That's active attitude towards life. The world is bad because man spoiled it, but the task of man is to transfigure it, to change it, to bring the godly dimension to this world. And so the Bible chapters, they speak even before the fall of Adam and Eve, and God comes into paradise and says, "This is your world. Protect it. Take care of it. Evolve it." So because God talks about the changing the world, so the man has a task of to be because God creates the world, but man follows up on God's creation, and that's why there's different attitude to science and to politics as well, because man feels powerful and feel conviction that learning God's word, he can transfigure, change the world, transform the world, embody God's design into in this world. And this is what the European technology and science is built upon, these principles, these precepts and dogmas, which are so rapidly developing right now, have been developing. Yes, certainly the technology of ancient Egypt were outstanding as well. So if we remember, in St. Petersburg evenings, intellectual symposia. So St. Petersburg, Demesta is writing about Egypt. Demesta, only Egypt was just rediscovered. And so he is writing. So we would not be able to do anything else. So can you build building a pyramid? So heavy blocks, impossible. So just our biologists can identify every breed of the bird and every type of the bird, but they did it 3,000 years ago. So then colored gold. How was it possible? No one knows how they made blue gold, green gold, red gold. So the Egyptians could do that. It's amazing. And so the medicine, Egyptians, doctors, so were invited to all monarchs' courts in France, in England, everywhere. And then Pythagoras, Paphalesso, and so all the Greek philosophy is the foundation of modern philosophy, and it's congenital. We're just only following up on it. And we, so the Solon was saying, so you're like kids. You don't remember your past. And then he starts talking about the Atlantis, and this is amazing by itself. And then in Timaeus. And so now you understand where the root of science is, and what is democracy at the end of the day. What is, let's go back to it one last time. It's science, in its, but in politics. Science and politics. We keep playing with it. We keep looking for new forms. And we have the right not only to technological discoveries in physics, medicine, and math, but not only to fight Ebola, but we have the right to make discoveries in social relations and experimenting, always experimenting. So like other countries, so Muslim East, so they're indignant with this sexual permissiveness. But look, quite recently, the Oscar Wilde was condemned for homosexuality. Actually, he died because of that. We know that even in the 50s, so the homosexuals were forcefully treated, and in West Germany, so they were they were punished with 5 years imprisonment for homosexual relations. Remember that. So it's not there anymore, it's gone. So that's another experiment. Maybe that's the way to do it. Maybe we should do it this way. Permissiveness may be good, so maybe not. We say it. So that's and that's a new iteration. But again, we are coming back to this is the culture that creates. So they certainly go by trial and error. So they make mistakes, but they are looking for something that they want, that they need. Because if man is God's slave, then he is supposed to blindly obey the law. But if man is a creative being, then he needs to look for things. In Christian Europe, they want to look great. So because they found the founding law, that is why. So they are developing in this area. But this looking for the right to search, the right to seek. So even the racial experiment is horrible. The Nazi experiment, it's still an experiment. It's a horrible, terrible experiment, but it's an experiment because that's the right of Europe to look for better things. But all of a sudden we realize that without God, things that were supposed to be better turn out to be worse. But at the same time, that's the way it goes. And that's why man has to change the world for the better, changing himself, and by changing himself to change the world for the better. And so this pathos of understanding, this active desire to improve, so we certainly saw Indian scientists, China scientists, so they were trying hard to find similar things in their civilizations. And so they admitted that they couldn't find anything like we have in Europe. And so many things in Buddhism are wonderful, but in Hinduism, etc. But there is no search of the kind. And so there was jurisprudence everywhere. So then, but there's no search, no seeking. So for bettering the sociological plane, cultural plane, it's not there. It's only the European man who did that. And finally the law, the most challenging component. Because we all remember the Hammurabi laws, then other laws who went to college, and they remember those. Then Confucianism, it's the law as well. So ritual rites. So the but in Egypt, there is no legislation in ancient Egypt. Can you imagine that? And but there's a notion of truth. The notion of truth, because truth is the most of a thing, the most important. So because every morning, so they would brought a little statue of Mat, so the goddess of truth, to so that the emperor could hold it, and the pharaoh could hold it, because the souls of the dead and his heart in the world beyond the grave, it's Mat, it's the goddess of truth. Sometimes she has a feather through her hair, sometimes an ostrich feather, because the ostrich feather. The ostrich feather is the lightest object, and that is why. So Mat, the goddess of truth, always in the world beyond the grave, and then in the hands of the pharaoh. And actually, the judge judged on the basis of his notion of truth and on the basis of precedents. And remember, Apostle. So because you are the law is for those who lost the ability to see the difference between good and evil, because the law is for those who don't know what's good, what's bad, like that boy in the Mayakovsky poem. But an adult and conscientious, cultured person, and who has a vision of truth, of sooth, of good and evil, and they are quite capable, such people, because the jury is not based. The jury are the former, garbage collectors, teachers, engineers, or politicians, or sales assistants that they studied law. It's not the point, because they have the feeling of truth. That's hence the jury, because that's why they can say guilty or not guilty, because that's how. And then there was this legal reform in 1864, and this in Anglo-Saxon countries. So this legal reform that actually added when the jury were added to the process. And then we have this wonderful code of the Pskovsky juridical legislation, and so said that the judge, and this is the Pskovsky law. So then it says that the judge should judge with an eye for the truth, It doesn't exist anywhere. With an eye for the truth. In India, by the way, in India, there are no technologies, but jurisprudence was developed very well. Why? Because they studied the God law, the divine law, So they studied the divine law thoroughly in detail. So philology, theology, jurisprudence. All these things is something that the southern Eurasia lived by, and it's not here. So then the Roman law, and then so definitions, etc. And so the Roman law is there, so it's a great achievement. But anyway, so the Roman law is the human law, made by human beings, not by God. And not by where will you find in Christianity so the law? And so in Judaism, yes, so there are some laws in Judaism in the Bible. In the Old Testament, because Abraham came from the Mesopotamian traditions and Egyptian traditions, but he was never part of the Christian tradition. So there were no Christian laws about that. So they invented some typical, but they're not laws. They're recommendations rather than laws. They are not laws, and man. So there was a trust of one man to another man. So this is the salient feature of European culture, because God is the creator of God. It is not God does not subjugate himself to the law, and God is above the law. And now we're coming to the most important thing, because God is creator and the architect. And so what's behind all this? Technological search, so then finding laws, portraits, etc. So what's behind it? Underpinning thing, freedom. Freedom is the most important underpinning, overpowering thing. When you ask theologians, what is the image of God in your heart? Because God is God the Son, God the Father, God the Holy Spirit. It's what was this image of God? Any theologian will say freedom. Freedom. It's freedom. It's exactly the freedom which is tantamount to the image of God in a person's heart, because God is not a slave of anyone. And man is not a slave of anyone as well, and that is why we men, being God creations, we act as God. We are free to act as we wish, and it was formulated in one short phrase, a famous short phrase that you know. So where God's Spirit is, that's where the freedom is. And man is certainly the image of God. Only if man abandons this, doesn't want to become a man, and does not want to become an image of God, then he immediately turns into a slave. And so in Egypt they knew that. For many thousand years before Christianity, they knew that. So this is the main problem, was determination, because God knows everything. He is omniscient. He knows what man will say next minute. And freedom. So this problem was addressed by Egyptian theology in the third millennium before Christianity. So there is this monument to Memphis theology. This big marble plaque in the British Museum, in the Egyptian halls. So there are some just little men there, just figurines, and so it was used during Islam as something else, but in chapter 57 of this monument it says that God. So it's very clear, so very straight, a spade, very good. So there are many Buddhist philosophical treatises as well. Yeah, because I forgot, I lost the count of time. And it says, this plaque says that the Creator sends food and everything we need to everyone, to the good and to the evil, to everyone. But one chooses the good, and another chooses the evil. And the life is given. And life is given to good, and death is given to the criminals. And so life means eternal life, because life is given to everyone. So, and death meaning eternal death. And it's not disappearance, annihilation, but this is eternal. Eternal existence in the form and shape of the God's image that has failed to manifest itself in the human heart, who is a criminal. So I'm talking about something very important now, very briefly, but very important point I want to make. We don't understand that myself. My students always ask me this question: how can we freedom and predetermination? How we can determination. So, like the famous theologian Losky explained, the son of because Mr. Losky philosopher, he explained in 1956 in his work shortly before his death. So, determination, predetermination. So, the basis of theology. So, God, having created man, so went for a great deal of a risk. He created another freedom, which does not come under his power of freedom. So the internal freedom, God certainly intervenes in implications, but God has no right and has no power to go into the personal freedom of man. So because internally man is free. And that's why certainly God was running the risk of creating this alternative freedom in the human heart. But actually, so man is judged for his internal desires, and not actually for the implementation of those desires. And so in Egypt, they knew that actually in Egypt we know. So then the idea of the judgment beyond the grave, we remember that, and so there are lots of small figurines sold about. So then the paper papyrus. So they're writing, they're painting. So then the images of frescoes, old Egyptian frescoes, and the most favorite one is certainly the image of the judgment, final judgment, the final trump beyond the grave. So that's where the soul, because it's a real European court. So where they judge, where they try a person, the soul of a person. So when the defendant is answering, so the claimant is God, and the defendant is the soul of the dead person, whether he can enter the kingdom of God or not. Has he implemented the image of God in his heart or failed to do so? And also, this is the Book of the Dead, and in many. And so this is exactly what, and the most important part of this dialogue are the words of the dead person. I haven't killed, I haven't fornicated, I haven't desired another man's donkey, etc. So then, actually, so that's where man tries to stand for his godlike nature. Is there anything in so because there's karma there? So what you have calculated, what you have accumulated, so good and evil. So they weigh the results, and certainly there is the final. In China, is there the last judgment? No. And in China, no. So because it's certainly the implications of Buddhism, because you got what you deserved. So if you behaved well, so you went to paradise. So you spent your life in crime and dissipation. So then you go to hell. That's it. So but there is no judgment. There is no guy. So then there is no defendant. And in Egypt there is a defendant, and in Christianity there is a defendant, and we all appear before the court. But the apostle Pablo is saying, but those who have created the image of God in their hearts during life will go straight to heaven. And so, dear friends, this is why the tolerance comes from this. So for the sexual deviations, homosexuality and other things, and because the society that lost these Christian values, they have not lost the Christian understanding of freedom. And so now we are at so we're diametrically opposite to the medieval ages, because during the medieval ages, so they violated those classical principles, because for the sake of God, they took away man's freedom. In Middle Ages, man became very limited, constrained in many ways by law, by Inquisition, and physically, serfdom, slavery, etc. And for the man to save himself, so they were trying just to save him forcefully. That's why the Inquisition fires. So not because the Christians became good and nice, but because it went counter to the spirit of Christianity. It was a huge crime against the spirit of Europe. And so when they were dragging people into paradise, so only a free person can go into paradise. Only a free person. And now it's the other way around. It's the other way around now, because we are Europeans. In Europe, so what we are witnessing now, so we alienate God for the sake of freedom. So establishing freedom is so high that God actually starts to restrict freedom. So, for example, homosexuality is something that is not good for God, and then they abandon God for the sake of freedom. And but the right to make a mistake is the part of the divine design, because everyone has the right to make a mistake. Because if a slave will be beaten for a mistake, and a free person who made a mistake suffers himself. But in Europe, there is the third condition, and the 20th century manifested it, and especially clearly in Russia. By the way, this serfdom, for example, as was described by Mr. Sinakosov wrote, so then the wild serfdom, so the tragedy of our revolution, so this violation of freedom of Christian civilization. So that's why we paid a very high price for it. And about the third thing that the 20th century brought is uprising against God and freedom. Uprising against God and freedom. In Europe, so there is freedom, and so they throw out God for the sake of freedom. It was the other way around in the 17th century, and in the 20th century we see a totalitarian regime, which is the uprising against both God and freedom. So this is the uprising against the essence of Europe. This is the crime against the culture of Europe, the legacy of Europe. So this is not Europe. This is an attempt to create out of Europe non-Europe. So this real crime of Nazis. So that's why the Nazis always appealed not to medieval European traditions, but to Eastern images. Is the desire to turn a free person into a slave. A free person into communism is the same thing. It's turning a free person into a slave. And if in any country we see so that they start, building Chinese walls between European values in this country and the destruction of such values with other understanding of man. So we can immediately see that in this country, so the political regime, the political power, so will eventually bring about the division between European values and the values in these countries, which will eventually throw a free and a man into the abyss of slavery, and so which is the most horrible thing for the European culture, which has always been referred to as the second death, the final death, which, unlike the first death, can be avoided if you stay on the principles of God-given right of freedom and independence for a free human being. I'm sorry that actually I butt in, but I don't know about you, but I'm amazed, I'm shocked, and I admire the erudition, vibrancy, spirited intervention, thought, the depth of thought. I just thank you so much. It's wonderful. So on my own behalf and on your behalf, and it's just so wonderful, great, in-depth considerations. So I want to go back to the roots. Thank you so much. And I would like to and so then seriously, we have a little time for discussion. And I think that Lena didn't say about Berezkina, who was putting together this program, and we do it for a purpose. We're not doing it just because we want to do it, because it's very well thought out, logical analysis, sequential analysis, and because our day is dedicated to these fundamental values of humanity, of mankind, and of culture, etc. And it's all interrelated. Because I want to go back a little bit. To throw us back into the previous dialogue and remember how Sergei Andreevich was talking about this present-day time and the imitation subject, and that we need to change values. And actually, that we change this discussion about faith and what we talk about the public dialogue, and usually they talk about simulators. Because it's a form, which has no substance, no content, and the Western values, European values, they have turned into this simulacre, because which has no meaning, no sense for the public conscience. So what people understand by European values. And so the culture, monuments, historical monuments, and then there are cliches. So when they talk homosexuals, dissipation, etc. And but when we start talking about senses, meanings, and we start to fill in this empty balloon, we understand that it's all irreplaceable. It's not important. And so there are meanings, but the more meanings there are, so even Plato in his dialogues was saying that labor is the most worthy thing that any man can do. And I'd like to dedicate the remaining 25 minutes to understand the meanings.
Denis Petrenko is from Bryansk. Well, thank you for this very fresh term. Do we have chances? Do we still stand a chance? No, we do stand a grand chance. Let me say, and not so much with respect to the European values. Let me distract myself from this topic a little bit. In the Buddhism of Mahayana's current, in Bodhisattva's oath, if a person decides to continue the worldly service rather than entering the nirvana, there is one principle. There are 10 oaths of supreme values, but one is most important. And in Sanskrit, it is fearlessness. This is how it sounds in Sanskrit: fearlessness. And then we shall have a grand future. A question, please. No, we should alternate. Thank you. Thank you for your lecture. Farhad Gulamov is from Sochi. I think that a key message of your lecture is this servant of God, the Son of God. If one understands this in this way, then I think everything falls into place. Why is it that even some of our higher church clerics have a little bit of a controversy? If we have the divine beginning, then we're not the servants of God. Well, indeed, a servant of God is not a mistake, just as much as Abdallah. It is not a mistake of the clerics, no. We have to add up one word here, which is most important, which is presupposed. A free servant of God. We are voluntary in our following the will of God. May your will be done. May thy will be done is the golden message of Jesus. It is not that we want our will be done, but we are prepared to elect this path. And the idea of a free servant of God, which is the paradox, is indeed what we should profess, because we are free in becoming his servants, but we know that God is good. And he is good, and hence we follow his will, because it is good. But we are conscious and free in following his will as much as the dwellers of the celestial Jerusalem. This is how these two things fall together. Alexei Abanin is from Moscow. Thank you very much, Professor. In your lecture, belonging to the European civilization is quite interesting, but is, I think, a bit too involved or extended. When somebody is dealing with, say, the political enlightenment and is talking to the common folk about Russia and the general notion of Eurasian world and the European civilization, and a common person is really telling us what criteria should we use to call Russia a part of the European civilization, and such a person wants to have a very, very coherent and simple answer. And my formula is very simple, but I'm an amateur. But my formula is, and please comment on it if you would, belonging to the European civilization is can be optimally assessed by three main attributes. which is belonging to the Christian or post-Christian culture, belonging to the Indo-European linguistic family, with the exception of several others, and finally belonging to the European race. Do you believe that this is a proper formula? Well, I'm very free. I'm very disheartened that you have disallowed President Obama to be qualified as a European, but he's, I think, a well-deserving man. But if I would debate all of these three positions. You have seen, you have heard from, let us take Egypt, which was partially Semitic and Indo-Europeans can live on the vast, expansive land from Europe through to China. Christianity, one of my students is a Muslim Sufi beautiful lady, so she's not European. She's not. Does this mean that she's not European? But when we talk, I understand her better when we speak on theological themes, even though we know that the Orthodox Islam is different from, say, Christianity in some ways, but we know that these things may well be understood. And I think that the European civilization is something not so tangible to be delineated in such rigid terms, but the primacy of a freedom and the dignity of a human being, dignity and freedom, which is in many ways very, very close to each other. But those things because this is in a way an Egyptian, Christian, European paradigm. You know, paradigm is examples or arguments, as we're using this in today's topic. So, if there are such paradigms, if there are such examples from the paradigm, then we may speak about belonging to the European civilization. And of course, nowadays, when we're having and of course, there are many attributes which may have further encompassing. Well, do invite me here. Well, if they ban me, then do invite me back. And you know that you have been ousted of the Moscow Institute of International Relations. I was ousted. And they came to me to say that I must continue lectures. And so I continue my lectures at one of the Moscow museums, and I never had so many students. So it's not too bad, you know. As Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya said, poor girl, you will not hang us all. Nina Baranova from Nizhny Novgorod. Well, the dusk of the European civilization is believed by many. Do you agree that it is in the crepuscle? No, I disagree. The Russian civilization with an interrogation mark is something that I have seen. This is not to say that I disagree with Arnold Toynbee, but as different from Spengler and Danilevskaya, Toynbee said that the crepuscle of a civilization is not to be talked with respect to the civilization, because civilization is a product of a collective will. The subjects live and die, but a collective subject is not related to death. And civilization is not a collective personality, but a totality of human will taken together. And if this will of the nation, if the will persists, if it does not abut into suicide, then there will be no dying away. I remember, as a historian, of course, and not as a witness, but you will. I remember, as a historian, in the 4th century A.D., the Alexandrian poet Palladius. He could not accept Christianity, and he wrote a very interesting poem. It seems to me that the Greeks have long died, is that we have become the bodiless ghosts, and we believe that our dream is a reality, but maybe we're alive, but the life is dead. This was written in the 4th in the 4th century A.D. And so the European civilization is well alive. But, you know, crisis that we're seeing today is not necessarily a death. Pavel Nikulin from St. Petersburg. Do we believe that European values are somewhat universal for all European nations? Yes, that is exactly what I meant. Both in spirit and in time. But then, of course, we can see very great differences. But these distinctions are a lot less numerous than the great similarities that we see in the general philosophical doctrines, in the legal context, even though there are some deviations and changes, but they're not cultural, civilizational. Say, Bolshevism is a disease. It's not something. It is not an attribute of the Russian civilization. It's a disease that the Russian civilization went through. Or just like Nazism is certainly a disease of the German civilization. My second question, however, is about the relation between the Russian and the European values, including the when you hold your polemic with the author of this caricature, sexual dissipation and the ability to withstand. We're being shown that Europe as a place where beaded women live and the states disintegrates. So do I understand it right, that you agree with the author of this cartoon, but that he is emphasizing these bad things too much? Is this what you're trying to contend? Well, to begin with, I think that reducing the European civilization to such expressions is delirious. Having such a great civilization behind us, if you're, Plato or Remarque, to reduce the European civilization to such standalone events or currents would be delirious, would be silly, would be unacceptable, really. And this is quite coterminous that I shall not read Goethe because Goethe urinated. So this is the kind of argument that we're dealing about. But I think that I'm, as a person of Christian values, I think that I'm certainly discouraged by such manifestations that we see, but I would say that even such expressions of sexual deviations are not a laxity or a sign of laxity, but rather a drawback of the same paradigm and the manifestation of that same paradigm of the European civilization. And we indeed are within the same universum, except that we are on a somewhat different phase because of the 70 years of the Red dictatorship. How about the separatists in places like Scotland and Catalonia? Well, what is to be said about separatism? I think that secessionism in Scotland, for that matter, was resolved for the glory of the European civilization. I'm Ekaterina Semyoshkina from Tumen. Do you believe that if people are granted more freedom and political freedom in Russia, then we would have chaos? Well, I don't think that this is a Russian idea. I think this is just a general lack of faith in humans, which is indeed what we've seen in the absolutist monarchies. Let us take in the French absolutism of the Bourbon monarchy, or in the Habsburg absolutism of the Holy Roman Empire. This is a lack of faith in the humans, in men. But of course, we must have faith in men. I think that people are a lot smarter than they're thought to be. So this is one of our totalitarian ideas, which we have inherited from both the Soviet times and even the autocratic Russia of pre-1917 era, which might be somewhat run against the European tradition. What we see in the old Russia, in the grand old Russia, is that the freedoms were gradually allowed, say under Alexander I in early 20th century, and then starting from the era of Alexander II, or in the Russian emigration, we could see the great blossoming of the culture and arts. And I have quoted Alexander I because we understand that the culture certainly blossoms a bit later. So the beginning of Nicholas I were indeed, as they would say, the birdlets of Alexander's nest. Khomyakov, Pushkin, and of course in Nicholas I's times they were almost suffocated or stifled, but you could see that the great Russian culture went through on the next blossom after Alexander II. So the 20 years of freedom, which might have been a hungry freedom in a way, are great years. And I think that this is the generation which we will see as coming back to the scene and maybe giving and producing a diamond age of the Russian culture. Rodion Garshin from Almaty, Kazakhstan. Thank you very much for your lecture. Max Weber spoke about the European paths of development in the differences between the Eastern and the Western Europe. Do you believe that such a modern or postmodern is the penchant of men for freedom? and how could you comment on the loss of modernity and Jürgen Habermas's concern about the discord with the tradition? Well, I think that modern art or modernity needs to have clarification. Well, yes, indeed. I was talking about the totality. So, are you talking about Jugendstil at the end of the 19th century? Well, no, primarily the Enlightenment. Well, I think that this is a lengthy process. The Age of Enlightenment, the declining of the religion, and Romanticism of getting back to the religion as a cultural treasure trove, as a source of feelings, and then in the post-Romantic era, in the post-modern era of the 20th century, in the post-World War I period, we are seeing a return to the religious topic on an individual level. Let us take Jacques Maritain, or let us take the example of the Christian psychology in France. Let us take the Russian Christian religious thinking, and even such philosophers as Jaspers and Heidegger, with all the inherent differences. I think that this is a very interesting trend of thoughts, but these are all within the general fold of the European civilization. Today's Indian is not particularly well understanding the atheism, but the atheism, indeed, even the Jews and the Egyptians understood atheism. This is the polemics that goes on, because there is the freedom, there is the main category, and of course this is most important, because freedom may go as far as to negate the divine power. But atheism is, in a way, one of the paradigms of the European civilization, not the main one. Ludmila Vasilyeva from Bashkiria. I think that your lecture may well be called The Spiritual Sources of Democracy. Talking of the tasks of God with respect to men on earth, spirituality, is it religiosity, or this is something over the system? When we speak about spirituality as something which is above the system, is something that men must understand to continue persevering on this earth, on this planet. And what is sin, was the question that I asked myself. So it may not be about just about the theological commandments, but also primarily the violation of the most important thing, which is love God in thyself. So negating or being and so sin is this ambivalence which is portrayed through mentality. Sin is this ambivalence, and as the Bible says, yes and no are the two answers. And if we do not understand the first commandment and do not perceive how much resource do we have in each and every one of us, we say that yes, we understand that we have been created after the image of God, but we as humans have the freedom of will. And in this sense, we are getting into the this system of spirituality and religious feeling. Well, I think that I would not go as far as to oppose the notions of spiritual and the religious. I think that spiritual presupposes a life in God, and this is what either an ancient Egyptian or an Indian would tell you. Even though an ancient Egyptian and an Indian were quite different in their views, and religion comes from the Latin root of reconstruction of the ligament, religion, the reconstruction of the ligament between man and God. So these things are not to be opposed, they're not to be contrasted. You're talking about religion more as a denomination. Well, now a denomination is somewhat different, like the case of Bashkiria. Yes, there can be different faiths, there can be different denominations within one faith, but religion as a notion is indeed the same and coterminous and co-inherent with spirituality. So the notion of sin is that everything which is outside of God is a sin. So in each and every case when we are not voluntary servants of God, in each and every case when we're not doing it with the in concert with the God's will, but we do it in accordance with our will, is a sin. So in this do we see in ancient Egypt, the concept of soul was most interesting. We perceive, we can hardly perceive soul as a body without body. In ancient Egypt, soul was rightfully perceived as quite a distinct category, and this divine power administered by the will in when it is embodied, and so it is becoming personal. So if this divine force is directed not in concert with the God's will, then this is sin. Whereas if this will is directed to furthering the good, furthering the divine good, as everything good comes from God, then it is what God wants. It is godly. Let me conclude this discussion by referring to Ludmila's point, is that we are going through and living through a period of great chaos and a great erratic gibbering in what we believe the philosophical notions are. So I think that there are general philosophical trends which are overlapping with the so-called religious discourse. I think that we should take into account such differences, not to be confused and not to be entangled into meaningless debates. Thank you, Mr. Zubov. Thank you, Professor, for your lecture and the time with us. We shall resume in 30 minutes. Thanks.